If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge, from worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Welcome to Family Law Talk. Family Law Talk. Presented by Kirk Stange of Stange Law Firm, PC. Stange Law Firm is a multi-state family law firm. Now, here's your host, Kirk Stange.
Welcome to Family Law Talk. We have an interesting topic today. The topic is prenuptial agreement pitfalls. And this episode today is based on an article on our blog, TulsaDivorceLawyersBlog.com, dated July 3rd, 2024. And the title of that article is Red Flags in a Prenuptial Agreement. So as a follow-up to the episode today, go on over to that blog and read this article for more information on this topic. Obviously, more and more individuals are interested in prenuptial agreements in this day and age. Some folks even come in and they're already married and they want a postnuptial agreement. And the idea behind these agreements is that in the instance of a divorce, there'll be protection. The divorce will be easier. It'll be simplified. Hopefully, it'll take less time, cost less money in attorney fees. And individuals coming in to, let's say, a second marriage or third marriage, something like this, a prenuptial agreement can be a great thing because it can protect the assets that they brought into the marriage itself, and then maybe deal prospectively with some of the issues that might be out there if a divorce were to occur. You know, the flip end, there are obviously lots of individuals who are still not, really excited about the idea of a prenuptial agreement. It can seem a little bit unromantic to some. Some might feel like this is a forecast that the marriage isn't going to work, and if we're going to be in this and be in it together, why do we need a prenuptial agreement? But that said, lots of individuals want these. They're becoming more and more popular, but there are some pitfalls. There are some red flags that people have to know if they're interested in getting a prenuptial agreement. And this is what we want to talk about today in this episode, so the listeners can hopefully get legal counsel who's competent and to practice law in their jurisdiction, experienced in drafting prenuptial agreements, and then the hope is that these kinds of issues can be avoided. Okay, problem number one of the most common problems with prenuptial agreements are the rush to the last minute agreements. So individuals decide to get married, and then maybe they come to lawyers to get a prenup, but it's a short time before the marriage itself. That's troublesome. Sometimes individuals, again, it could be a deal where the engagement isn't very long, so they don't have a lot of time out of the gates. But in some instances, individuals might have been engaged a long time and they just kind of sat on this. They didn't understand the urgency to get this done and make it happen. So listeners need to understand that there can be reasons prenuptial agreements can be set aside or not enforced by a court. And some of these reasons are duress, which is one party is under a tremendous amount of pressure to sign this. Coercion, which kind of goes with duress, but it's one party is putting a whole lot of pressure on the other person. And so duress and coercion can be proven at times through a rushed process where a party says to the other, look, I know we're set to get married in, let's say 2, 3, 4 weeks, but you got to sign this prenup and we're not getting married, this kind of thing. And of course, coercion and duress could take place in other ways, but the closer you get to a wedding date where parties begin the process of trying to get a prenuptial agreement put together, the worse this is. And lots of prenuptial agreements will be set aside for the coercion and the duress principles, but the timing can be a big key in a judge determining whether either of those two things have taken place, all right? So better to do a prenuptial agreement as far away from the wedding date as possible. So you can't, nobody can give you any definitive time frames like X number of days is okay, but as a general rule, further away from the wedding date, the better. Obviously, individuals might hear this and they're like, wow, well, I don't have a whole lot of time now. We can't push back the wedding. So they still do the prenup and go forward with the wedding, but they just have to understand the legal risks that are there if it's, the prenup is signed very close to the wedding date. All right. Issue 2 is no legal representation. In order for a prenuptial agreement to be enforced, both parties should really have independent legal counsel, right? So they each need their own lawyer. The lawyers cannot work in the same firm. They got to be independent, and both parties need to be advised thoroughly about the provisions in the prenup, the clauses, the pros, the cons, these kinds of things. And if both parties have a lawyer, that makes these agreements a heck of a lot more enforceable. But if both parties don't have a lawyer, that's not good. If one party doesn't have a lawyer, that's not good either. Both parties really need to get legal counsel and a lawyer. And even if it's a situation where somebody hires a lawyer and that lawyer takes, a short period of time to read it and go through the pros and the cons with the individual, that can suffice. But either party not having a lawyer is not good. All right, vague provisions can be a problem. There's lots of forms out there, form prenuptial agreements, these kinds of things. People want to pull them and use them, and there could be some generic clauses in there. Individuals just need to be careful. The provisions in a prenup need to be clear on its face. They need to be carefully drafted. There shouldn't be ambiguities in there. There shouldn't be stuff that's up to a lot of judicial interpretation. And so having a lawyer draft a prenup in a way that's specific, that's clear, that's detailed is a good thing. And vague provisions, on the other hand, are definitely red flags or pitfalls and things obviously to avoid. All right, problem 4 is impossible or immoral provisions. So sometimes in prenuptial agreements, unusual clauses might be put in there. Clauses that try to dictate too much day-to-day life. There could be provisions in there that are deemed to be unconscionable or maybe illegal. These kinds of things can all be problematic. So, in short, sometimes individuals can overreach in these prenuptial agreements, put clauses in that are immoral, that really try to govern day-to-day life in a marriage, which isn't a good thing. And maybe some of the clauses might even be impossible. And the more stuff that's like this in a prenuptial agreement, the greater the chance it can be set aside. So this is something to be very careful with and make sure lawyers aren't overreaching in terms of the clauses in a prenuptial agreement, all right? Problem 5 is more protection for one spouse. So prenuptial agreements really need to be balanced. In other words, both parties need to gain something from the prenuptial agreement in some way. So if the prenuptial agreement is written in a way where one spouse would be walking away with, a great deal, maybe almost all the assets, and the other spouse isn't getting much anything, that can be really problematic and could result in a prenuptial agreement to be found to be unconscionable. And if it's unconscionable, then the court might not enforce it. So it's important that there be a give and take, that the prenuptial agreement, result in some way of both individuals benefiting through the agreement itself, and that it not be too one-sided where a judge thinks, wow, one person really came away great and the other party to this marriage is coming away with nothing significant, nothing tangible. That's a problem, okay? And so these prenuptial agreements need to be balanced, and people need to be a little bit more generous than maybe they were thinking out of the gates, to make sure that when a judge is reviewing the prenuptial agreement, they see that both parties are gaining in some way. All right, so other questions out there. What is considered unconscionable in a prenuptial agreement? This is tough because this is really in the eyes of a judge, and a judge would have to make this determination. So if there's a prenup and the divorce is filed, that prenup has got to be filed with the court, and then the judge is going to review it. And again, if there's outrageous clauses in terms of morality, or there's clauses that have impossible clauses for people to meet, or more protections are there for one spouse, and the other, in other words, one spouse, again, is walking away with a great deal, and the other spouse has a terrible deal. I mean, the more that's out there, the more likely it could be deemed unconscionable. So it's not a deal where anybody can give you cut and dry rules. It's kind of a judge saying, I know it when I see it, and this prenup doesn't look fair, okay? So unconscionable, fair, I mean, all these terms can make lawyers a little bit uncomfortable because it's, it's a balancing test, if you will, but it's important that these prenups be written in a way that's two-sided and that both parties gain in some way. All right, what constitutes duress in a prenuptial agreement? Well, I covered this a little bit more before, but again, closer to the wedding date, the more likely a court could think that there's duress. I mean, if one party is saying things like, well, you need to sign this, or we're not going to get married, and this is kind of thrown on another person at the last second, that kind of thing, I mean, that could definitely be a bad thing that could result in duress. So, I mean, duress, you're thinking pressure. You're thinking one person's really leaning on the other person, and that the one party doesn't even really want to sign this, doesn't want to do this, but they're getting pressured, right? There's duress, there's threats, these kinds of things. I mean, the more facts out there like that, the more likely a prenup could be set aside for duress, all right? In terms of what cannot be included in a prenuptial agreement, this is a question lots of individuals have. The big one is you can't have any clauses in a prenuptial agreement that deal with child custody, child support, or any of these kinds of issues. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, you can't deal with custody of kids that haven't been born yet, child support for kids that aren't born yet. Parties' financial states could be very different the years, many years down the road after marriage. So you can't put anything in about child custody or child support. That's stuff that cannot be put in a prenuptial agreement. The alimony or spousal maintenance issues, another big issue. Look, in some circumstances, and I'd say a lot of circumstances, parties can put clauses in that where both parties are waiving maintenance, or one party's waiving maintenance or something like that. But look, in some states it could be problematic, and it could be problematic theoretically based on other provisions in the prenuptial agreement itself. So look, these clauses can be common in prenuptial agreements, and oftentimes they are enforceable, and in some jurisdictions they're enforceable way more often, but there are some jurisdictions where it's just not 100%, all right? So individuals need to know that. There's some ambiguity there in some states in terms of the enforceability of these kinds of clauses. All right, other things that would be problematic at a prenuptial agreement, and let me give you a few more, would be non-financial personal preferences that a spouse must adhere to, right? So these kind of morality clauses, again, the clauses that govern the day-to-day living of a married couple, like these kinds of clauses, you hear some weird stories about celebrities putting these clauses in prenuptial agreements and these kinds of things. And again, some states or judges might have more willingness to enforce these kinds of clauses, but as a whole, these are pitfalls or red flags, and in most instances, the kind of stuff to avoid. All right, any kind of clause that requires a spouse to agree to or allow illegal behavior, that shouldn't be in a prenuptial agreement, and any kind of clause that encourages divorce. So if there's clauses in there that really encourage divorce, that shouldn't be in there, and that would be troublesome if it was. All right. All right. Typically, again, what you're trying to deal with in a prenuptial agreement is the financial matters and the financial disposition in terms of the marital property and debt, and that kind of stuff is okay, but when you start delving too far out of that, it can be problematic. All right, so the final question is, are prenups enforceable? Again, prenups are generally enforceable if they follow contract and marital agreement guidelines, and so it's important that it abides by case law and in your jurisdiction, and do some uniform premarital agreement acts, and I mean, they generally need to be drafted in conformity with those acts. And again, farther away from the wedding date, both parties have a lawyer, no duress, no coercion. Another big key is parties have to fully disclose their financial affairs, so full disclosure of finances and debts. If all this stuff is taking place and the prenup doesn't overreach or a postnup doesn't overreach, it's generally going to be enforceable. But it's these pitfalls, these red flags, that create problems, and these are the kinds of things it's important to know about if you're going to be seeing a lawyer to have a prenuptial agreement or postnuptial agreement drafted. Avoiding these pitfalls or red flags are going to increase the chances of enforceability. All right? Well, definitely an interesting topic. Again, is a follow-up to the episode today. Go on over to TulsaDivorceLawyersBlog.com and read the article titled Red Flags in a Prenuptial Agreement. It'll give you more information on this topic. But thanks for tuning in today. Stay tuned to our next episode of Family Law Talk coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Family Law Talk with Kirk Stange. Visit StangeLawFirm.com for more about today's topic or to put Stange Law Firm to work for your family today. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements. Neither the Supreme Court of Missouri or Illinois reviews or approves certifying organizations or specialist designations. The information you obtained in this podcast is not, nor is it intended to be, legal advice. You should consult an attorney for advice regarding your individual situation. We invite you to contact us and welcome your calls, letters, and electronic mail. Contacting us does not create an attorney-client relationship. Please do not send any confidential information to us until such time as an attorney-client relationship has been established. Past results afford no guarantee of future results, and every case is different and must be judged on its own merits. Kirk Stange is responsible for the content. Headquarters, Office, 120 South Central Avenue, Suite 450, Clayton, Missouri, 63105. Kirk Stange is licensed in Missouri, Illinois, and Kansas.